Welcome to Lead Well, Live Whole. I'm your host, Michael Sirmon. Every episode, we'll spend a few minutes exploring the challenges, questions, and realities of everyday life, because success means little if you lose yourself in the process. So take a breath, settle in, and let's spend a few minutes exploring life together. Have you ever agreed to do something and regretted it almost immediately? Maybe it was another meeting, another project, another volunteer commitment, another favor, another responsibility. Someone asked, and before you really thought about it, the answer came out. Sure, I can do that. No problem. And then a few minutes later, reality set in. You looked at your calendar, you thought about your energy level, you remembered everything already on your plate, and then you realized you never should have said yes. Now, most of us have been there. In fact, many of us live there. So today I want to talk about something that sounds incredibly simple, but is surprisingly difficult. The courage to say no. Not because we're selfish, not because we don't care, but because every yes cost us something. And most of us are paying more than we realize. Welcome back to Lead Well, Live Whole. I'm Michael Sirmon. I think one of the biggest misconceptions in life is that our biggest problem is a lack of opportunity. For many people, the opposite is true. The problem isn't too few opportunities, it's too many. Too many commitments, too many responsibilities, too many expectations, too many demands, too many people needing something from us. And somewhere along the way, we began believing that being a good person means saying yes to everything. The problem is that life doesn't work that way. Every yes requires something from you. Your time, your attention, your energy, your focus, your emotional capacity, or your presence. Nothing is free. Every commitment comes with a cost. And the challenge is that we usually see the opportunities long before we see the cost. I remember periods in my life when saying yes became almost automatic. A new initiative? Yes. Run for public office? Yes. Need someone to lead a project? Yes. Need someone to solve a problem? Sure. Need someone to step in? I'm your man. Need another meeting? Sure. Need another report? Absolutely. Need someone to carry one more thing? I'll handle it. At first that feels productive. It feels responsible. We feel needed. We feel wanted. It feels like leadership. Sometimes it even feels noble. But eventually something starts happening. You become busy managing commitments instead of living your life. You spend your days responding, reacting, fixing, handling, managing. And before you long, you realize you've built a life where everyone else's priorities determine how you spend your time. And that's a dangerous place to live. One of the reasons saying no feels so difficult is because many of us have attached meaning to it. We think no means we're selfish, or we're lazy, or we're unhelpful, or we're difficult. We worry about disappointing people. We worry about letting someone down. We worry about how we'll be perceived, and so we say yes, even when we don't want to, even when we shouldn't, even when we know better. And what's interesting is that most people don't struggle with saying yes to things they genuinely want to do. They struggle with saying no to things they don't. That's where the real tension lives. Not in commitment, but in boundaries. Here's a truth that took me and my wife years to learn. Every time you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. Every single time. The problem is that the thing you're saying no to is often invisible. You say yes to another work commitment, you may be saying no to family dinner. You say yes to another project, you may be saying no to rest. You say yes to another obligation, you're saying no to margin. You say yes to everyone's needs, you may be saying no to your own. Life is full of trade-offs, whether we acknowledge them or not, and maturity is learning to recognize the trade-offs before they become consequences. I think one of the hidden costs of always saying yes is that eventually resentment starts showing up. And maybe you've experienced this. You agree to help, you volunteer, you commit, you show up. But deep down, you're frustrated. You become irritated, you feel trapped. You begin resenting the thing you agreed to do. Not because the opportunity was bad, but because your yes wasn't honest. It was guilt, it was obligation, it was fear, or it was pressure. And to be honest, that's not sustainable. So here's a statement that challenged me when I first heard it. If resentment follows your yes, it may have been a no all along. And that's worth thinking about, because resentment often reveals where our boundaries should have been. Now let's talk about something that sounds similar, but is actually very different. Service versus people pleasing. Both involve helping other people, but they're driven by completely different motivations. Service says, I want to help. People-pleasing says, I need you to approve of me. Service comes from generosity. People-pleasing comes from fear. Service is a choice. People-pleasing is often a reaction. The behavior may look identical from the outside, but internally the worlds apart. One is healthy, one is exhausting. Even surface from a depleted position can still be healthy at times. Because when your identity becomes tied to keeping everyone happy, you'll spend your life carrying responsibilities that were never yours to carry. And no one can sustain that forever. As leaders, parents, spouses, friends, and caregivers, we often convince ourselves that saying yes to everything is proof of our commitment. But what if the opposite is true? What if saying no to the wrong things is what allows us to fully commit to the right things? Think about the best leaders you know. They weren't available for everything. They weren't involved in every decision. They weren't attending every meeting, and they weren't chasing every opportunity because they understood focus. They understood priorities. They understood that leadership isn't about doing more, it's about doing what matters most. Because when everything becomes important, nothing's important. I think that one of the reasons so many people feel overwhelmed today is not because they lack capability, but not because they lack talent. And it's not because they lack opportunity, but they're simply carrying way too much, whether at home or at work or at church or whatever you're involved with. There's too many obligations, too many expectations, too many commitments, so that we never stop long enough to evaluate what the cost is of the commitments. And eventually all that weight begins to show up. We begin to feel the stress. We begin to have an impact on our health. We begin to feel the strain in our relationships. Our joy is missing. And we eventually begin to drift in our sense of purpose. So the issue isn't always what we're carrying. Sometimes it's what we don't put down. So how do we begin changing this? The first step is recognizing that no is not the rejection of a person. It's a decision about capacity. I can value someone and still say no. I can care deeply about someone and still say no. I can even support a cause and still say no. It took a long time for us to learn that we can love people and still set boundaries. In fact, what we learned was that healthy relationships often require boundaries, because boundaries aren't walls like a lot of us think, but they're gates. Boundaries determine what gets access to your life, to your time, to your emotional and mental and financial capacity sometimes. And the truth is that if everything has access, eventually nothing gets the attention it deserves. And when you say no, you don't need complicated explanations. You don't need long apologies. You don't need a 10-minute speech. Most often, a simple response is enough. Hey, I appreciate you thinking of me, but I can't commit to that right now. Or my schedule won't allow me to give that the attention it deserves. My favorite, that's not something I can take on at this time. It's simple, it's respectful, it's honest. And the people who respect healthy boundaries will understand. And the people who don't may be the very reason those boundaries are necessary. As we close today, I want you to consider one question. What are you currently saying yes to that your life may be asking you to say no to? Maybe it's an obligation. Maybe it's a commitment. Maybe it's an expectation. Maybe it's a role you've outgrown. Maybe it's a responsibility that was never yours to begin with. But whatever it is, remember this. Every yes costs something. The question isn't whether you'll pay a price. The question is whether the price is worth it. Maybe your next breakthrough doesn't come from adding something new. Maybe it comes from protecting what already matters most. Maybe the courage you need right now isn't the courage to do more. Maybe it's the courage to say no. So thank you for joining me on Lead Well, Live Whole. Until next time, lead well, live whole. And don't be afraid to protect the life you're working so hard to build.